How you feeling, Pierre? How you doing? Nobody's been killed yet?
No, it wasn't a good day today.
Already?
No, this train's just... I was standing on the platform at the Northern Line listening to the good services running on the Northern Line, and there just weren't any trains. So by the time one turned up, I'd missed my train from Euston. So I then had to queue behind 60 Japanese teenagers. So you want to buy myself
You're not making it up, it's not possible.
I swear to God, in fact, I was going to take photographs just in case you didn't believe
Is
me.
there any possibility you could like stay over at the house of somebody? Say Mark, Mattia, Lauren, and then you can just go together?
I'm sure I live just as close as anybody to Euston.
Yeah.
It's not.
How closer?
It's just me.
No, that's obvious.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. No, I didn't mean for closeness. I meant so that they could put a little harness on you. They could
Trot me round.
That's right.
Little Scotty
wheel you
top
in.
back,
That's
yeah.
right. That's it. Yes, exactly. Oh, so you've seen Finn throughout. So, is your R9 9R in? Have you handed it in?
I have to send it to you, you sign that, isn't it?
Okay, I saw it. Right. How are you? Did you get the?
Sorry.
You got the?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Right. Now, before we begin, I assume that this is going to be more or less it. Is anyone know what's happened to Giancarlo? Is he like fallen off the cliff?
I saw him 2 weeks ago. He has problem with finding a solution for his daughter when he comes over.
Oh, I see, right.
So
Mhm.
that's probably why.
Okay. Anyway, a couple of things. One is I would like to be serious about the New York trip, and I would like to remind you of this possibility. Do you really want to go? And if so, we have to pick, 4 days, I figure we need. And I was thinking middle of April. The head of school wants to go, which means that maybe we could think of a way of getting some funding. I don't know, at the moment, I can't say that there's anything that resembles funding. So it would be paying for your own airfare, which would probably, if we got a group rate, probably around £280 per person, something like that. Who is still interested, given the money, if nothing else?
I couldn't do this.
Okay, that's because you're going to Paris.
Just I'll be in France and Lisbon
Yeah,
and Swansea.
in Swansea,
Yeah,
okay, I
we're
feel much
nearby
better now.
Swansea.
Excellent. Does anybody want to go, if we did it mid-April?
Yeah, I need some prior notice so I can book time off work. First.
Okay, so, Mark, could you do it?
No.
Lauren? Okay. If money were made available, would that change anybody? No, not in your case. Mark, in your case, would that change? No. In your case?
Yes, I am, yeah. I'm on the verge. Just for budget, yeah.
Yeah, budget, yeah. Let's see what can happen. What is the most amount of money you could gather together, including airfare? Could you gather like £500 or something like that? 'Cause we have to think of accommodation for this thing. See, because there are these New York apartments you can get, and we could just get like a big New York apartment. I mean, people aren't nervous about sleeping with each other, I mean, sleeping together. Are you?
Still not coming out right.
Anyway, I mean, with your clothes on, but you know what I mean.
Still no.
would anybody mind if it was a large apartment and there was, let's say, one bathroom? Okay, would you be okay, you'd bring like a sleeping bag or something, how about that? Nope.
I'm still not on the trip, you know.
Okay, right, I know. Okay.
Group sex notwithstanding.
That's right, okay, fine, it's class. And then if it were in May, would that make it better, easier?
Yes.
Yes, it would make it better, easier. Mark, you'd still be out,
No, no, I can't.
you'd still be out,
Yeah, it's pretty much mismanaged.
yeah. Okay. And if it were in the summer, it's way too far away, but if it were, I mean, we'd probably get cheaper rates.
Yeah, but then most staff is not in the summer.
No, that's a problem, yeah. Of course, it is New York.
In May, it's probably the
Yeah. Okay, so we'll try and find 4 days in April. I will get back to you, watch this space. Okay. The other thing is to remind those people that are applying for PhDs to apply. Okay. The deadline is coming up. I think the deadline is technically the 6th of April, something like that. It could be completely wrong. 6 or the 16th. It has a 6 in there.
I think it's the 16th.
But if you want me to look at your, I mean, I can't look at it too carefully without, because I'm on the committee, but if you want a general sort of sense of how it's going, like that general thing, then get me your, premier applications before the 30th of March. So that would be very helpful. There's a lot of people applying, so for the money side of it, think about that. But you never know. Don't apply, don't get it. Right. Anything else need to be mentioned that anybody can think of before we delve into this?
If similar to New York, money probably for me, but in September there is the Istanbul Biennale that opens.
There's the what?
Istanbul Biennale. Which
In September?
It's always extremely fun.
It's fantastic.
City and together. If I can manage to put one together, I would go.
Well, we could, I mean, I'm all in favor of going to these biennales, particularly Istanbul, and also, you know, of course, Venice opens in June. You know, so, are you interested in doing that kind of biennale trinket or
Yeah,
junket?
in particular Istanbul.
Istanbul
Yeah.
is always much more provocative and interesting than Venice. Than other things.
Yeah. Do you know that at the Van Eyck, I say this with love, is that on? Oh, never mind. Anyway, but anyway, there were students that had a controversy about going to Istanbul in particular.
Yeah.
Because they didn't think that it was a clean enough city, which I thought was really quite shocking.
Who said this?
The artist that I was dealing with in Jan van Eyck.
Clean as in like hygiene or morally or?
As in white, yeah.
Right, okay.
Mhm.
You wonder why these people are in education.
Yes, or claim to be in art even, for that matter. Anyway. In with anger, out with love, as Henry says. Okay. So, definitely. Okay, we're ready to begin?
We all sharing it, aren't we?
Yes, yes. Who wants to step into the mud first?
Matthias.
Okay, Matthia's been,
Volunteer.
let me just,
Yeah.
sorry before we begin. Technically, on Fridays, I am doing my own work, but for those of you that are doing your PhDs and postdocs, you can book appointments in the next couple of Fridays if you need to discuss your work, but it would be in London. Sad. We have to get on the train. But if you want to have like an undisturbed, how many hours do we have? About 2 hours, I guess. More or less, and of course
Apart from the mechanic.
yeah, it's part of the fact that the neighbor's car broke down and we needed to try and get it sorted out. Okay, yeah, that was true. More or less.
Fairly uninterrupted.
Fairly uninterrupted. So because here I always find there's always something happening. So just email me the next couple of weeks. Okay.
That's on me. Okay. Well, I thought I understood this book, but I propose you read it. now I read it 3 times and I don't.
Can you say the name of the book?
The book is The Living Currency of Pierre Klossowski. Klossowski, I don't know.
Oh, it shows that way.
Klossowski.
Klossowski, yeah.
Of which we have a wonderful English translation that Lauren found online in the Dropbox.
Yes.
Yes. Now, it does link to what we were reading of Heidegger and the critique of Heidegger, but then it takes off in a rather different direction. If while discussing the issue of identity with Heidegger, we touched upon his analysis of what it means technology in the present, in the modern culture, in the modern world, Western modern world, which to him is an extension of the metaphysical articulation or distribution of the world, which has as a predominant element when it becomes technology the point of uniforming everything and homogenizing all distances and making everything an item of consumption. One could make the first step toward Klossowski and saying a commodity. Now, Klossowski concentrates on this notion of what's a commodity, especially thinking, I could make a link back to Heidegger, thinking what would be a more authentic life, not enframed, not entrapped, not captured by technology. And in his, the problem, the way he poses the problem, seems to me, this is where I started already, not understanding fully, that it is saying on mostly on the basis of the SAD, but also analyzing a lot of psychoanalysis that seeps through his text, that there isn't a moment of pure life. There isn't a moment of
Pure immanence, basically.
pure immanence or purely formed individual that is self-sufficient, self-contained, which we already found in Heidegger. But Heidegger seems to hope, at least, for a positive exit from the capturing, where he puts forward the possibility of a relationship with being and an identity based on the relation and not on the end points of immanence and essence and appearance, essence and phenomenon. In the reading that Klossowski makes of this problem, it seems that in modern times at least, the capture is always taking place. And what it starts from is the mechanism that keeps returning, the logic mechanism that keeps returning in the various nuances he analyzes, is the difference between object of use and object of exchange, which I believe was first put in this term by Marx.
Mm-hmm.
Object of use is something that one needs naturally.
Of course, you would call it use value.
Use value and exchange value, yes.
Do you know where he puts that forward?
No, not me. I believe it could be in the Grundis.
Das Kapital.
Das Kapital, no.
And I think it's either in chapter 26 or 25. Chapter volume 26, 25.
And this passage between use value and exchange value is really, I always figured it as a T-joint, because there is a use value from the subject to the object. I need the food, I need that food as the value for me, just for my subsistence, to the value that potato can have in the trade, which is completely unrelated to its use. And instead of having commodity, money, commodity, one would have money, commodity, money, which reverses upside down, put completely upside down the original use of an object.
And in so doing, that's how profit is
That
obtained.
is how profit is obtained. Marx uses that famous metaphor of the camera obscura, which, you know, in a photographic camera, the image in the front outside, in reality, is flipped upside down by the lens. So the reality photograph, the representation value of something, the exchange value, is upside down, literally and logically, is the opposite of what it is supposed to be, or was as a use value. Now, these.
Can I just add one other
Sure.
thing, just like this, I didn't really do a synopsis of the marks here, but that would be called then the commodification of capital, or the circulation of capital. So he basically doesn't make the leap around commodity. I mean, he does, because, but what's important in the Marx move is that he's talking about commodity as capital, or capital as a commodity, whereas in Klossowski, something else happens with the commodity.
Yes, that's what I was then trying to link it. Now, this movement lends itself to what is much more than an analogy, but let's start with the analogy, between a desire or a pulsion that has a direct object, which traditionally, Klossowski identifies with sexual desire for procreation, and what instead is called a perversion, which takes what is called, and the word is very important, an incongruous object. So they take something else in order to maintain the pleasure of desire without ever, what's the word in English? Exhausting, satisfying it into its, between quotation, natural object or object of use. So there is the same passage from a use value to an exchange value. Something happens in psychoanalytical terms or in pulsional terms, where it seems to me that this is the problem that Klossowski is posing. Instead of going from the subject to the object desired, one tries to dwell in the moment of desire as long as possible, and takes something else, diverts this originally or allegedly original straight line onto this incongruous object. Incongruous as something that does not match the original natural useful object, the original need. It misaims, goes somewhere else, and the exchange that would happen, and this is where it becomes quite complicated. The exchange that would have happened between subject, need and satisfaction, no longer object, subject and object, need and satisfaction, doesn't match, is not an equal exchange. There is an expenditure, there is wastage that does not pay back.
So, just to be clear with what you're saying, or what you're attributing Klossowski is saying, so Marx presents the circulation of capital, and he says, and under the circulation of capital, CMC goes to MCM. Yes, MCM. Okay, so capital, money, capital. So you have capital, you get money for it, you end up with capital, but it's the reverse. So and then there's the profit margin comes in, and one sells their labor value, their use value, and so on, their labor power for this. Okay, but then you're saying that with Klossowski, he's making the claim, he has to take as a given that there is a domain called desire, a plane of immanence, a plane of something, a surface of desire, that an economy of desire, let's say, that is involved in the circulation of MCM. It's either the same or it's parallel to it, or somehow it's linked. Somehow it has some sort of relationship. But in order to make the exchange, one must leave that economy of desire, even if it's for a second, in order to do the exchange. So the point is to stay in the economy as long as possible, and then not reach out for the intended object. I just want to make sure.
This is the first layer, but then it complicates.
No, but let's just get the first layer. So the first layer is that he's making an argument.
There is an economy of desire, which
is not the same thing as the libidinal economy.
No,
Okay,
although
right.
it drives from here. a lot.
Yeah.
Which does not want to close a circle somehow. Or better, and this is where it adds a new layer.
Wait, just stay with the first layer.
Okay.
Go make sure. So the first layer is that there's an economy of desire, and that economy of desire is part of the subjectivity.
Yes, it
Of the
is the
exchange.
would be the lead, what has been presented as the linear relation between need and satisfaction of the need.
Right.
So object of use.
So, and that object can always, or can often escape the use. That's like, let's say, the Zizek-in line, so that one is never able to grasp
To reach
the,
it, yeah.
the object of desire. But in Klossowski's argument, he's saying, well, not only is that not the point is a lot of times one isn't interested in reaching that particular object of desire.
Yes.
Because within the economy of desire, other things present themselves on the field of desire that are, let's say, not distractions, but are borrowed from the circulation of
Yeah,
capital.
he uses the expression, if he relates erotic pleasure and then reproduction, and speaks of erotic pleasure as something that has been traditionally seen in function of reaching the stage of reproduction. So the erotic pleasure and the expenditure of energy and time and everything else that might go into it was somehow the price to be paid for the reproduction. And he is instead saying this area of erotic pleasure, and this is where he starts drawing from the south more heavily, takes off by itself,
Mhm.
and is no longer seen in function of,
Mhm.
but it becomes, but he doesn't use this word, but to make it a bit clearer, it becomes an end in itself.
Wouldn't it be closer to say it becomes relatively autonomous too? It's not really autonomous.
It's not autonomous because
But I mean, when you say an end in itself, does that imply an autonomous feature to it?
yes, autonomous features as long as it becomes, there are a number of folds upon each other at this point that take place. The erotic pleasure that would have been in function of reproduction becomes the object of desire. So what would have Klossowski links these then directly to the industrial age, so it's not possible to keep two things separate. But then what seems an object that has been manufactured, mass manufactured, only for consumption, no longer for its individual use, because we need to have food, but food is given to us because we need to consume it, because they need to sell it to us, and we need to buy more goods of any sort. So it becomes, it loses the central point, it loses the position of being an object of use, it loses its importance as an object or a good, and becomes a simulacrum. It stands there for something else, it itself is hollow. And apparently, Klossowski seems to say at least, the erotic moment, the erotic pleasure, seems to cover the same, to play the same role. It is a simulacrum of something else. But in reality, he says, it is absolutely not true. It is everything else that is a simulacrum for the erotic moment.
Okay, anybody want to take that apart? I mean, just, first of all, does anybody have in their mind what the word simulacrum means? I want to make sure we're clear on that word, because that's a word that's used all the time, well, everywhere. Yeah, you want to give it a go? Just to make sure we're clear on that word.
Make a parallel that probably is far more familiar to us. Working as artists, the interest in the final produced object, I believe, is far less important than the time we spend making it. I believe the time one spends thinking about whatever project one is working upon gives much more pleasure then finally saying, okay, this is the book I wrote, or this is the painting I've made, or the performance. The elaboration of it is the real aim, not the produced object that then is circulated. And obviously the contemporary art, object and elaboration, they can take any form, but the process of making, if one allows the metaphor of making, if it is ephemeral, is more interesting than the final product. Now, this is the same difference that exists.
So that's not simulacra.
Well, the final product becomes a simulacrum of one makes X in order to spend in time making it.
Okay. And so the X that exists is the embodied energy, and therefore
Yes,
you're using simulacra as this sort of embodiment of the process.
Yes, instead of having, if we revert to erotic pleasure and reproduction, which Klossowski puts almost in a linear sequence in time. First there is erotic pleasure, then there is simulacrum, there is reproduction.
Which is kind of crazy. I mean, because not everybody who would be engaging in sex for, let's say, reproduction, realizes along the way, oh, I actually prefer erotic whatever, and then they lose track of the reproduction. I mean, what is it that allows them to make that initial claim?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand which is a simulacrum of each other, or which does he say is a simulacrum?
He's saying that in the lay understanding of what is called perversion, or in the lay understanding, if one only dwells in the erotic pleasure, dwells on something that is hollow, because erotic pleasure is a step towards, or is in function of, reproduction, in the traditional modernist rational point.
Which is a big if. I mean, which is a
yeah,
big.
it's quite an important point which way round he gets it, because it's
Yes.
it seems to be it's either a very kind of conservative historiological viewpoint, or it's direct reversal of that. You know,
He's criticizing this.
Yeah, but it's still to criticise it. I mean, it's again, it's sort of like we were talking about gender last week. Yeah, it wouldn't have necessarily occurred to me. I mean, to place these two things in any kind of relations
Well, I might have,
with each other whatsoever.
I
you know.
don't want to make it too strong. Maybe I misunderstood this point.
No,
I'm
I'm just curious as to which way round he. So, shall I answer that about the simulacrum?
Well, yeah,
don't
because I think that what you're arguing that Klossowski is arguing, which I'm not 100% certain that's what he's arguing, but let's hold that for the. But what you're suggesting is that something, let's say this is the painting or this is the field of the product of it, emerges out of the process, and you can't talk about the process. So this is called your simulacra. This is the simulacra of the process. That's how I'm hearing you talk about the word simulacra, and that isn't simulacra. So I want to make sure that
there are various
get
ways
that.
of understanding. So it's not the way, for example, Derrida or Deleuze would put it, or even famous Baudrillard would put it. But it seems that here, the way it emerges is a double reversal. It's not only something that pretends to be real and it's not.
I found quite a good reference
To simulacra.
well, in the here,
In here is where?
in Klossowski's.
Oh, right.
In the
Nietzsche and the vicious circle.
translated, there's a thing about the key terms. He distinguishes phantasm and simulacrum. Quite introductory.
Can you
way.
read it out loud? And then Barnaby, you can go and make your comment about simulacra.
He says, like, phantasm and simulacrum are perhaps the most important terms in Klossowski's vocabulary. The former comes from the Greek phantasia, appearance, imagination, and was taken up in a more technical sense in psychoanalytic theory. The latter comes from the Latin simulare, to copy, represent, fame, and during the late Roman Empire referred to the statues of the gods that lined the entrance to a city. So, in Klossowski, the term phantasm refers to an obsessional image produced instinctively from the life of the impulses. My true themes, writes Klossowski of himself, are dictated by one or more obsessional or obsessional instincts that seek to express themselves. A simulacrum, by contrast, is a willed reproduction of a phantasm.
Is a what reproduction?
Is a willed reproduction.
How do you spell that word, wield? W-E-L-D.
W-I-L-L-E-D.
Oh, it's a whirl.
Willed.
A will,
Yeah.
W-I-L-L-E-D, sorry.
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 A simulacrum is a willed reproduction of a phantasm in a literary, pictorial, or plastic form that simulates the invisible agitation of the soul. The simulacrum, in its imitative sense, is the actualization of something in its incommunicable and non-representable, the phantasm, in its obsessional constraint.
Can you read it again?
Yeah, that last bit is where it's most helpful, I think. Should I just read the last two sentences?
No, read the whole thing again. Just read. Yeah, from where you wrote before.
Phantasm and simulacrum are perhaps the most important key terms in Klossowski's vocabulary. The former comes from the Greek phantasia, appearance, imagination, and was taken up in a more technical sense in psychoanalytic theory. The latter comes from the Latin simulare, to copy, represent, feign, and during the late Roman Empire referred to the statues of the gods that line the entrance to a city. In Klossowski, the term phantasm refers to an obsessional image produced instinctively from the life of the impulses. My true themes, writes Klossowski of himself, are dictated by one or more obsessional or obsidianal instincts that seek to express themselves. A simulacrum, by contrast, sorry.
No, it's good. And that's the translator.
Is a willed reproduction of a phantasm in a literary, pictorial, or plastic form that simulates this invisible agitation of the soul. And this is the key bit, I think. The simulacrum, in its imitative sense, is the actualization of something in its incommunicable and non-representable. The phantasm in its obsessional constraint.
So would you say, this is Molineux's work, he's very famous for these particular, the one that he's most well known for. Well known for all these actually. This one. Would you say that that's what we're talking about then? Would that be a simulacrum?
Yeah, well, I think it's that's
That's
like
the
to do
will,
with
the willed fantasy.
I would think this is more trying to sort of like work with the phantasm. Presumably, that's what's incommunicable.
Right.
So
So, but
arts-
would this be
arts
the
is just as
simulacrum
well.
of the phantasm that's been willed to presence?
Well, maybe it's a bit representation.
Well, see, that's my question. So, oh, this one. This is the one that's most.
Maybe, I don't know.
But is it representative? I mean, was it represent?
Well-
See, I mean. That's good. Read that sentence again, just while you're looking at that photo, or that image. Pass it on.
My true themes, writes Klossowski of himself. Oh, no, hang on, let's stop here. In Klossowski, the term phantasm refers to an obsessional image produced instinctively from the life of the impulses. My true themes, writes Klossowski of himself, are dictated by one or more obsessional or obsidianal instincts that seek to express themselves. A simulacrum, by contrast, is a willed reproduction of a phantasm in a literary, pictorial, or plastic form that simulates this invisible agitation of the soul. The simulacrum, in its imitative sense, is the actualization of something in its incommunicable and non-representable.
He is going. I believe the word simulacrum here is not to be taken as it is normally used in postmodern discourses.
Which is why I want to clarify.
Because the the whole analogy between economies and desire, which then allows us to use the special economy of desire, is based on the notion, it's never directly said, but it's obvious to me, that it's based on the notion that desire works, produces things, and which are the simulacra.
See, and this is the important point.
And
The desire is like a laborer.
yes,
It works.
and that's why there is all this discussion about industrial and pre-industrial society.
Excellent.
And what the desire really wants is working. It's not this final product. Otherwise, you really go mad. If we couldn't imagine, dream, fantasize all the time. In this sense, I meant that it's far less important the final piece of art, and it's far more important spending time making it.
No, I mean, it's clarified for me, how about for everybody else? Mark, is this making sense for you? What do you think?
Yeah.
Guy?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if the yes answer is Grace? Yes.
Do you clarify?
Yeah, okay. Barnaby, you want to give it a go in the simulacra thing?
I think we've gone further than I was going to say anyway already.
Okay.
Into a kind of more specific.
So
I was just going to do a gist of general. I mean, I don't know.
So we'll just give the general postmodern simulacra.
It's a. Well, I was going to say it's a representational strategy of something, anything. But its precondition is that it's not what it's separated.
It's not what it presents itself as being.
Yes, exactly. Which doesn't mean to say that it's some sort of like kind of necessarily fiction, but it's that Heideggerian A equals not A does not equal not A. But it is separated out so that like if I showed you a photograph of myself, then that's not a simulacrum until I invite you to say, right, this is me. You know, if you know arrest this person or something. You say, well, that's a photograph. No, it's not a photograph. It's a simulacrum. It's a representation of my identity. But that can occur on all sorts of different levels. I mean, noticeably.
Could an MP be a simulacrum?
Well, no.
An
MP is a representative person, and it's not quite the same thing because he's representing his constituents or her constituents, but he's not a copy of his.
Good. Okay, we're getting there. Yeah. We're getting there. So representation and copy are very.
But also there is another important element in this simulacra thing, in the postmodern reading of it, is that it's a copy without the original. It's a hollow copy.
Well, I think that's a sort of second order kind of discussion. I mean, I think perhaps the best way to describe it is not in art, but in fetish type behaviour, where desire, which is sometimes kind of inchoate, difficult to vocalise, is expressed in fetish items. So the fetish item, let's say high heels, since we're looking at Pierre Molyneux, then become they become an externalized articulation of an interior desire, but they are the desire. They're formal. And this is when they kind of almost attain their own legitimacy as the simulacrum kind of becomes inaugurated into a social sphere, if you like.
So what would be the difference then between, I mean, you're completely correct in what you're saying, but just to push it, to make sure you're clear about, or everybody's clear about, what would be the difference then between that and, let's say, a symbol? How does simulacra differ from, you know, because I could say high heels symbolize, you know, a fetishization of female, come on in.
Sorry, I'll catch you with.
Okay.
Because
That's something to come in on. High heels symbolize, everybody's very serious with the monobrow. That's great.
The symbol is a referent. So it refers to, probably actually my example of the photograph was more of a sort of symbolisation. It refers to something in the original, but the simulacrum can stand in place. It's almost there's a sort of interchangeability about it. I mean, I don't want to. I'm trying not to say certain things. I don't particularly want to. I mean, don't want to get into the Baudrillardian sort of, you know, which is real and which is not real. But it is open to debate, just like the kind of high heels. It's like, well, it becomes more than just a kind of reflection or reference to, say, sexual desire. The high heels have now become the sexual desire, you know, and have in many ways transplanted it, or have often become the only kind of existing form of language which is expressing this desire.
Okay, so how many people have questions about that, just so we make sure that Okay.
Sorry, I don't.
So, for example, okay.
So, like, what are my questions? Oh, I've got loads.
No, the key here is that the way that the way both of you are, three of you are actually presenting this, which is all correct on one level, is that the way in which the simulacra is being presented here always already is embedded or imbued, two different words, but still, with a sexual something. There's something sexual about it. So we're not talking about necessarily a coffee cup, but we would be if the coffee cup was expressing the sexualness of something. So there's nothing necessarily fetishistic about a high heel. Though obviously once they start becoming this patent leather 5-inch thing
with dildos on the straps,
on the straps and so on and so forth, which you know, anyway, the point is that what is it that makes something simulacra as opposed to strictly a sign of it or a symbol for something? We're so close, we're so warm here.
It's the, I mean, I'm guessing, but I'd say it's when they start to articulate, they pass into language.
But science
Well, no,
passes into
it's
language.
pretending to be real.
And, yes, one?
Oh, well, I think it's this first bit where he says it comes from the fact that the mere act of fabrication objects puts their purpose into question. So it's sort of like, and this confusion between the tool and the simulacrum. So something to do with the fabrication.
No, I mean, so, I don't want to dwell too long on this because we want to get back to the thing, but it just seems to me not at all clear in people's minds.
Well, we can actually go through the argument from the notion of simulacrum. The other element, the other key word that comes up straight away in the second page is sterile. And if one stays with the distinction between erotic pleasure and reproduction, Klossowski says that apparently erotic pleasure is sterile, as would be manufacturing before industry, because the object can only be used for what it is and nothing else. While in industrial situation, the object is always evaluated according to how much more wealth or how many more objects it can produce. So it's not sterile, but it produces something else. And the simulacrum is first identified with the sterile moment. It is this funny line that instead of going from A to B to C, it just goes out in a spin of its own. It just remains there. It is no longer productive.
Okay.
And so it's not exchangeable. So it has in the view that the Klossowski criticizes. The simulacra is a decayed object of use, is something that is indeed what is in the lay way understood as a perversion, something that goes away from the version, the sense, the real direction of production, interaction, uses, life altogether. Diverts from teleology into a sort of parking lot where you should just keep spinning in circles, since I'm doing driving lessons.
Here. Oh, in fact, yeah, once you're supposed to be doing a driving license.
Next Tuesday, if I don't flatten any other ladies.
Yes, I see.
So there is an element of productivity that is intrinsic to the notion of desire, as we pointed out earlier. And because of that, there is also an element of waste. And what is seen as wastage, generally in industrial terms, Klossowski positive at the beginning, is always seen as an investment in order to then come up with a more efficient product or a more efficient way to produce a product. So the waste is always regained, is not lost forever. But instead he is thinking that in an industrial society, in industrial culture, that wastage should be read in an entirely different way. And that wastage is the real product of the big machine of an industrial society that obviously works with desire, because we are desiring characters.
Desiring subjects.
Desiring subjects. Indeed, if one wants to read the few line long introduction.
To got a good question. So, a clone is not a simulacra, because it's a perfect
Copy.
according to
This argument, yeah.
Yes.
Klossowski.
But
Whereas
also
say
according to-
photocopy.
According to the reading that Derrida and Deleuze make of Plato, critique of copies of writing, because the concept comes from there. I don't remember which dialogue, but there is one of the myth or fairy tales that Plato uses to introduce concepts, where a young god goes to the king of the gods and says, I have an amazing invention. What is it? He says, oh, well, it's this thing's called writing. What is it just for? Well, actually, you can write down all you're going to say, all you've done, and you will remember it. And the god rejects it, saying it is a pharmacon, because they play along the word of pharmacon, which in Greek meant both medicine, the solution, and poison. And rejects it because Plato says it would not reflect the life that is in live speech. It would be a dead copy. It would be just the destruction of everything that we know. And it's a simulacrum. It pretends to be what it's not.
Which is a very good example of simulacra here.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, because what the simulacra does that a symbol doesn't do is that it provokes one to move. It acts as though it were real.
Yeah.
And that's part of the
Well, yeah, I don't
feature.
remember.
Can you explain that? Why does the simulacrum provoke movement, but the symbol does not?
Or in what way, I think it's a better way to put
In
it,
what
because the
way?
why is not going to give us, because a symbol will be, like for example, let's say you see the flag, and it provokes in you, I don't know, rapture, patriotism. So it's not like it doesn't have any provocation, the symbol, but it doesn't create the process around which that thing was made to start with. Whereas the simulacra engages the fetish.
Would it be fair to say that the flag, I think, is an interesting example of that. In countries like this one, where the flag is a national symbol, the first thing would be true, and that it would be a symbol. But in certain countries, like say the United States of America, where the flag is a simulacra and it's, I think it's a criminal offence to deface it because it is actually a simulacra for the national identity. So that in the case of the flag, it can be, depending on which jurisdiction you're in, either a symbol, like in Britain, or a simulacra in the United States.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
right.
all right.
Yeah. But that's still not the simulacra that is being.
No, I
called
realise
here,
it, yeah.
Just so we're clear about that, yeah. That's like a sort of more general approach to simulacra, and actually there's a very good article by Derrida, which is the introduction to Le Coulebart's Mimesis book, and it's on negation. It's called de negation, so it's a double negation, and he starts to develop sort of the negative version of mimesis. Go there. Okay, go on. So you were developing how the simulacra, and then it gets into the second most important point, which is the sterility.
So, okay, yes. So the simulacrum is apparently seen as sterile, but the way Klossowski frames the problem, I will read this small bit because it's clearer than if I try to explain it.
What page is it on?
Is the first page.
Okay.
Many anathemas have been flung against the ravages of industrial civilization since the middle of the 19th century in the name of emotional or affective life. Inputting to the means of industrial production a pernicious effect on the affect or emotions means acknowledging that it has considerable moral power in order to denounce its demoralizing influence. In the French says precisely the opposite, that the demoralizing influence is denounced, and by doing that, the considerable moral power is acknowledged.
Gosh.
Instead of saying that accusing industrial production of a pernicious effect means acknowledging that it has considerable moral power, and with the pretext to denounce its demoralizing influence, that makes sense. But in order is just a wrong translation.
Yeah, okay. So read it again with the right translation.
Inputting to the means of industrial production a pernicious effect on the affects or emotions means acknowledging that it has a considerable moral power with the pretext to denounce its demoralizing influence. So we are accusing or criticizing the industrial mode of production as having a demoralizing influence, but by doing that, we are acknowledging that it has a very strong moral power. It comes from the fact that the mere act of fabricating objects put their purpose into question. How does the use of a useful object differ from the use of art objects, which are useless for any actual substantive purpose? Nobody would ever confuse a tool with a simulacrum unless it is a simulacrum that an object has its necessary use. So these last two lines, nobody will confuse a tool with a simulacrum unless it's as a simulacrum that an object has its necessary use, is the whole point that Klossowski makes, where he's saying that there is a double flip in this problem of simulacrum and production.
So are you, at this stage, which is obviously still on page 1 of his argument, but would you be suggesting, as one begins the work of Klossowski, that he's making an argument that art, which is useless, gains its, let's say, power or its status or its right to be because of a desiring economy, and that the desiring economy can't live without art, because it's precisely the simulacra that gives art its power.
The whole art system is the simulacra that is built and used by the working desire that needs to express itself.
And do you agree with that? No.
No, I just had a question. I was thinking of like this thing, I was thinking back to Little's the dream work bit in contrast to sort of the artwork. And so I was thinking that the industrial post-doctoral system that he's setting up here with its simulacra is like the dream work in that it doesn't, and the artwork would function differently. So I think I was wondering whether what he was getting at was the artwork is what breaks the value system, so it brings difference into the system. So it's priceless in that way. It's not that it's priceless in another way necessarily.
In which way is it priceless?
In that it sort of breaks the system of the economy. So the exchange economy is sort of which is standardised. He often refers to as a numeraire, or he refers to the gold standard, but in terms of just whatever economy is consented to, would be like the dream work. It's sort of nicely kind of contained, the difference is kept out of it, whereas the artwork is priceless another way because it can bring a sort of change to the disruption differently.
Right, and so in that sense, art retains its liberatory function, or anyway, its revolutionary function, or its radical function, I put it like that, in the sense that the radii it can cross-slice into capitalist, or whatever, circulation of capital. That's what you're saying, he's saying.
Yeah, because I was thinking like what he was contrasting Fourier and the Sard in relation to sort of perversion or different sort of, and then I thought he was like setting those two up, and then he moves on to his position, which is different.
The art issue it remains a bit unsolved to me.
Well, it's very straight. I mean, it's very classical. I mean, he might be using a whole edifice to make it differently understandable, but that is the argument about art. That art keeps, keeps out of the. I mean, even though we know perfectly well that art doesn't keep out of. Not only does it not keep out of the general economy, but I mean, I think it's fascinating that a whole wall of Banksy. First of all, why would anybody buy Banksy? But that's another issue. But
it's being stolen to be sold.
And it apparently was sold in the end.
Was it really?
Yeah, and it got quite a lot of money. And the worry that people had about this is that other places that have Banksy will now see a raft of scaffolding going up and walls coming down and being shipped over to the U.S.
I can actually sell somebody Bristol if they're interested. It's not a bad price either.
Yeah, but this is what I didn't find, again, though I got lost at a certain point a lot in the text. I read it a few times, and the more I read it, the least.
Why did you love it to start with? Let's go back to when you were innocent.
I found fascinating that the closure is clear in saying that all of the industrial machine is set up to satisfy desire. And it would be foolish to think otherwise. I think that because it is deterministic and geared to efficiency, mechanizes and automatizes all the processes, it would leave desire out.
Right.
So the whole of the industrial system as it becomes a gigantic simulacrum on one end, and then the closing bit where he's showing that even in the industrial system, even when we are at the top of the game, when he speaks of film stars and other characters of this sort, we are still paying with our body. This is what.
And what would be? I mean, that is quite a refreshing and challenging, let's say, addendum to the Deleuzian argument in Oedipus and in anti-Oedipus in particular, with the desire in machines, and that capitalism is really just an economy of desire. So I'm wondering, what do you think differentiates that? Because he's not making a Deleuzian argument. In fact, one might want to make an argument that he's criticizing. But in what way does that move? I mean, if one takes as a given that that capitalist relations of production and the circulation of money is still playing someone's game around the conception of what it is to be human, what it is to have a body, what it is to be in this world, that there's some view, or let's say a complicated view, a heterogeneic view, but it's still a view of the industrial age has a view. This is for code's position. Every century has its position. So you can talk about the 19th century and actually mean something by it, as opposed to just sounding like a lunatic. And so he's saying, okay, this personality, as it were, that a century can have is in fact rooted in the question of desire, which is demonstrated by the way in which the simulacra expresses itself. So how does that differ from the Deleuzian?
I'm not be able to answer.
Okay.
But while you were asking these, a parallel with Heidegger again came up.
Yeah.
Because Heidegger somehow builds a model where there are always two layers. One that is the spirit of the time, the 19th century, 20th or 21st, whatever, and one elusive as they might wish, which is essential or eternal. And yes, he speaks of identity and difference is rather ungraspable, but the element of something authentic and essential is there. While here, the work of desire, difference, you mentioned, you put that together before, is far more, there isn't another layer, there is only, this is what I found very, very interesting, what elsewhere is called dispositive, the distribution but also the capturing of our reality and ourselves in it is all there is. And the only play we can hope for is that of difference or differentiation, is not somewhere else. So they all, the world becomes a simulacrum, and, or the distribution becomes a simulacrum, not of an original that is not there, because, or better, the simulacrum itself breaks down for this is what it is, and face it, you are in it. So coming out of it, and you have used, your body is used constantly, even if you've paid millions to play for Arsenal or whatever, it's your body that you're paying.
It's a hard argument, though. I mean, in the sense that if you're paid millions versus paid nothing.
Yes, absolutely.
You're weighing it up.
But it is. But it still says that there isn't. It makes a difference at the end between the industrial slave and the living currency.
See, this is the point.
Yes.
So there's a different kind of, let's say, class
Yes.
relationship. It's not the class relationship of the economic man, as it were.
No.
It's the desiring classes and the way in which those get permeated and, let's say, striated, because it's not really in layers. There's a, they're kind of in intersecting layers, braided layers even, something like that he's trying to articulate. Dane, what do you think about this? Can you translate any of this? I'm going to call on everyone who hasn't said anything, so be prepared.
Yeah,
What are you hearing in this?
Are we talk about desire and pleasure being the same sort of thing in this text?
No.
No. Okay.
And desire, well, let's play this. Desire is pleasure with the impulses connected, with the drives involved.
Yeah. Okay.
Desiring is pleasurable.
Desiring is pleasurable, but pleasure,
But it's got strings attached.
it has strings attached, it has a whole,
And
yeah.
I'm going through Leotard's assassination experience by page at the moment, so
yeah.
I'm going via that.
And what are you going via that?
Well, the main point there in here is to talk about not to look at these hyper-realist paintings not as representation, but
Can you show Monroe's paintings? So we can see it?
find some. So,
Yeah.
I don't know, hyper-realism. It's got this monochromatic blue which sort of
Yeah.
cuts, where it acts as a dividing screen, and the libidinal screen it cuts out aspects of desire, puts them through an economy, and I suppose to try and make the point that, yeah, you can't look at these things just in terms of representation. got to be economical. These subjects well, doesn't call them subjects, motifs in the paintings are things of desire. They're full of flashy cars, fashion, but there's no, you don't get any sort of, pleasure from it. It's cut off by this screen. It's held back. It's filtered through something. Then he goes on to talk about the Marxist prostitutes, how to sell your body.
He doesn't mean the prostitutes who are Marxist.
Yeah.
He means Marxist are prostitutes.
Mm.
Right. Just so we're clear on this.
That you give as much as you receive. If any contrast it to Baudelaire and courtesan, it gives more than receives, but in that sort of sense, you become bankrupt or you become indebted to whatever it is you're giving to. So, in order to not have someone have that sort of power and sway over you, you've got to be economical about your desires, pleasures, in order to give yourself distance for movement and.
But this point, you're absolutely right, because it comes up here when he's analysing side by side the Fourier and the Sartre. He speaks of the issue of property of one's own body and the issue of property of one's own enjoyment and pleasure. And prostitution comes up, and in yet again different way, but similar to the fact that all Marx are prostitutes. Because it says everybody is a prostitute in the industrial system. But the problem of...
Well, Bataille says that God is a prostitute, right? God is a whore. This is one of his famous lines.
There is in here that because the old problem is, how do you keep, or is it possible to keep control of one's own body, property of one's own body and persona, therefore body and mind, spirit.
And also a society that produces that as a question
Is already problematic.
is already the society that is producing these desiring machines. And that's part of the argument.
Yes.
Because you're not going to find this in, I mean, not that you have to go to some ethnically different, like the native peoples, but if you do go to like the Ojibwe, you'll find that they just don't have this conception of a prostitute at anything. Because the land and the notion of property itself doesn't exist. Certainly doesn't exist as ownership.
And indeed, the problem here comes from, it's not because the Sartre has spoken of...
You said the Sartre?
Yes.
Yeah.
Has spoken of forms of perversion and sexuality that is a good reference, is that the Sartre as, a horseback around the revolution at the top of the modernist line of thought that posits the individual as the basic unit of all the system of thinking and of living, sees fundamental problems with that. I've never read the Sartre directly, I'm reading it from Klossowski here. And basically sees that the way it is put here is that one can only receive as much as one is going to be able to give back. Otherwise, one will be in debt for what one has received and no longer be in control of oneself. One will no longer be his own property or one's own property. That will become somebody else's property. And so there is and the person that gives has more than the person that has received. In literally terms, the bank gives you the money for your mortgage, and you are in debt to the bank, and the bank owns you, your house, your life. Although you have physically the check, you have much less than the bank does. So the whole issue of credit and debt is the reverse of what is immediately thought. It's not material, although it has very strong material consequences. So owning one's body, and it seems that the emphasis is at the moment here is far more on the body than the persona as a whole, although ultimately we will point in that direction.
And what is, just as a sign, what is meant by the body?
Well, I'm thinking the body is the physical body and all the acts that the body can do. So that it doesn't explain it directly, but obviously there is an issue here with the idea of waged labor. I sell an hour of my work. Why should it be that an hour of my work in different activity is paid differently? Why should it be that if I break my back loading a truck, it's acceptable, and instead if I'm a prostitute, sexually a prostitute is not acceptable? I'm still using my body, still for an hour, and maybe even for the same price. What's the difference? Same gymnastic control. So there is an issue on where is the control, where is the property of one's own body. And
Let me say this very respectfully, but using labor to lift a door and then breaking one's back is not the same as being a prostitute.
this is what is going to explain here, because it's saying that the property is over one's enjoyment, not over the bones and muscles.
Well, or over the, or to put it slightly differently, erogenous zones of the body are not, are important. And if they are not accounted for, and it's made an equivalence that, let's say the vagina and the ear are exactly the same. This is not a comment on your piece, Harvey, but I mean, in terms of like, Foucault made a comment once that got him into a lot of trouble, which was that he didn't understand the difference between rape and getting hit in the mouth with a fist. To him, it was the same. He didn't understand what all the fuss was about with sexual assault. And a lot of us have to sit him down and say, well, actually, sexual assault is not slightly different. It is completely different than this kind of thing. And I think it's important, even with these guys, when they're trying to make some kind of comment about how similar it is to use the body, and what they're actually equating is the wage is the 25 pounds an hour or whatever, not the actual use of the body. And it's when they're not actually pushing their own argument, which is around how the erogenous zones and the take on moral, ethical positions that are embedded in the body. They become no?
Isn't that right? When he starts talking about aggressiveness and seriousness, he's sort of touching on that.
But also,
he's touching on it, but he's not.
Though he does say when he speaks about the sun, I'm trying to find the page, that the property is precisely because the person has a dignity and a value, and the fact that I can pay for it and then dispose of it as I please is what is sold. So is the humiliation or just the possibility of humiliation of that dignity that is being bought. So this is exactly what you're saying. It makes a difference between loading a truck and being a prostitute.
Even though both are prostituting in that sense.
Yes. One can go out Atlanta saying that you're working advertising, you're sending the best of your ideas for capital or whatever, but it's still, there is a difference. Is buying the dignity is not buying the body.
Right. So what is all this about then in terms of our seminar? I mean, you're doing an excellent job so far on sort of appealing, different parts of Klossowski's argument. But, I mean, Grace, that painfully I'm going to now ask you. What are you hearing in this?
Well, I read it as the physical body, and he talks about the exchange of bodies and what it would be like if we were in a situation where if it was an economy where we actually exchanged physical bodies and what that would mean. So if we were paid physically with people, it would change. You'd have to look at how that person would be sustained. So you would essentially, wage them or give them value in terms of how much sustenance they need or all the kind of practical things that they'd have. And that's why it wouldn't work, because you'd always essentially have some kind of debt.
But of course, that was such a crazy part of his argument, because there has been slavery, where people really have paid with bodies and people's bodies. So either he doesn't realize that slavery has existed, you know, and in fact, there was a very interesting program on BBC the other day about the slave trade here in this country, and how the way in which slavery ended, people had to be paid off. People who owned slaves had to be paid off in equivalents, and then the slaves were basically not freed in the end. They were just kind of kept on. And in fact, in South Africa, when I was there, a number of white people who had black people who were working for them. The people who were black lived in underground tunnels and would come up through the floor. They would open a floor panel and come up and serve you your tea. It was just, I remember seeing this person come out of the floor and just being, well, what is this? It's like seeing a ghost. And the person I was talking to, the person who had been enslaved on some level, and then now was just working for them, said that they wanted to stay as a slave. It was safer. And that was, you heard this argument a lot in the South and so on, in the States, and of course in women's liberation, with people talking about not wanting to be liberated and so on, women and so on. So he's not really talking about that side of it, or if he is, he's very reactionary. I mean, which I don't think he's that reactionary. So what do you think, pushing that argument a little bit further? I don't want to push it further. There's something else that's going on. Let's go like this. If the economy can be a simulacra.
I'm still not clear on what we mean.
Okay.
That's the issue, I think. I've
Okay.
always understood it as a copy without an origin.
Right.
And that's my understanding of it. So.
And what is a copy without an origin?
Well, we were all taught through Bertrand and like Disney World was the example we were given, that it functions, but it's created without an origin. No, it's fine. I know it's stupid, but
No.
that's what we were taught. So that's my.
No, that is Baudrillard. I mean, you know, Baudrillard.
I think he's projecting slavery.
He's rejecting it, but that's why. But
think he was.
Strongly.
Slavery.
I mean, I think like actually why Foucault says he says like you worked out something. I think he says he says those who said it then say now no that's it here, it gets around but no one has ever really gotten around. Sartre pointed out those truths that Sartre pointed out once upon a time, truths that no longer you have already gotten around. So I don't know. So obviously Foucault thinks that he has gotten around something here. So I'm going to find out what he's gotten around.
You hold on to that. Let's just go back to the
bit,
okay. Say the bit.
The first instinctual impression forms the organic and psychic unity of the agent. Well, this sounds like the sort of visionary repression sort of thing in terms of the Freudian thing a bit. But this is sort of it's this sort of like it talks about infrastructure and self-structures, but it's this whole sort of thing. I don't know, it's underlying the economy, or the importance of the economy, or this sort of like power source, sort of. That's what there's something like really critical here, which is sort of operative, and sort of that all these sort of
Well, let's just go back to the question of the simulacra again. Guy, do you have a position on simulacra?
Well, I know from The Matrix and
The Matrix.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
so
And how do you know it from The Matrix?
well, just trying to I know it kind of in the same way as you do.
So it doesn't have an origin.
And it's a representation of a reality that you don't know if it is the best representation of. That's what is the truth.
Okay, so it's almost like a hologram that you're stepping into, something like that.
Yeah, sort of. I kind of, so sorry. Yeah, and then the difference, I kind of understood what the difference was a few minutes
Okay, so let's just try it. Samira, you want to give it a go?
Is he getting that currency or money is a simulacrum and the body is as well, and so the body is in a state of flow, but because it's already a simulacrum, it's irreducible. It can't be exchanged. You can't exchange what you can. You can't exchange. I think you can't exchange money for money, and so he's slipping out of commodification.
Very close, although you can exchange money for money.
Yeah, I used to do it for a living actually.
Yeah, the stock market.
I was going to thank you.
That's right. No
Really should know
banks,
that.
No,
you
I
know.
believe that on this point, but you cannot exchange body for body unless you realize that it can be reduced to currency. So your reading, when you say that the body is valued for what it costs to maintain, is, in my understanding, is what it says. It's not the case. If it were like that, it wouldn't be a point. What we are
Lord Grace, the one time you speak.
what we will be buying or selling is not the physical maintenance, and not even what it can produce, but is the dignity. That's the currency in it. The thing that can be alienated or annihilated if one wants to. That's the value that the human currency, the living currency would have. This is why it puts it into the last chapter about human currency. It puts it in sexual terms and no others. It doesn't say, I'm sending you a very strong man to lift all these things, or people that can cook wonderful stuff. No, it says men will be paid with women and women with men, and one assumes that if you prefer something else, you get that.
So which page is this?
The living currency at the beginning of I numbered it 28 in the printout, but there are no pages on these.
Okay, so I've got PDFs already.
Yeah,
yeah,
it'll be
yes.
28.
I can read. Let's imagine for a moment an apparently impossible regression. So before the stage of money being invented, to an industrial era where producers have the means of demanding object of sensation as payments for from consumers. So bodies are objects of sensation. These objects are living beings. This kind of bartering would make producers and consumers into collections of persons. So these are not even but persons, supposedly intended for pleasure, emotions, and sensation. How can a human person serve the function of currency? How could producer, instead of paying for women, get paid in women? How would the businessmen and industrialists pay their engineers and workers there? In women. And who would maintain this living currency? For the women. Which also presupposes the inverse. Women working in personal jobs will pay in guys, and so forth. So that those with feminine currency at their disposals, it goes to the root of the notion of the economy, which is potential on one side and expenditure on the other. And he is saying that in industrial society, this is what is taking place. So the subject is caught in this game.
Yes, he was saying that. Unfortunately, he's also, I mean, it's that kind of example. This is something that's annoying. You have these very radical thinkers coming up with this heterogeneous notion of simulacra, which is what we're trying to figure out. And then they rush back to their male-female scenarios and take that as, oh, well, or it could be anything else, but it couldn't be anything else. That's the important point about how that economy is working. And therefore, if you look at the fact that they have this male, being paid in guys, he says, but I'm sure in French it's actually men. So the women are being paid in men, and the men are being paid in women. But what's actually being paid is the sexual exchange, and that's what should be discussed. not whether or not it's being paid in women or men.
But is it because he's said here that the currency is sensate bodies.
Yes.
Now,
Then he switches into the heterosexist
but so, I mean, I don't really understand. Perhaps I get it's a translation thing because that doesn't make any sense to me. So, like, if I'm getting paid, if in this hypothetical economy I'm getting paid in sensate body, what does it matter to me? I mean, it's not so that I can engage in sexual congress with this body, because that would just be a fairly standard transaction. So we have to imagine that this kind of, there's a valorisation of the sensate body, and why does it make any difference at all whether it's
Exactly.
whether it's a woman or a man?
I believe
it's nothing to me. I'm just told
Yeah.
that a sensate body is of value, as I'm told that this piece of paper with 20 in it in my wallet is of value. I'm expected to believe that. There's some notion of a guarantee somewhere in.
But you're expected also to be able to so-called barter, or anyway, buy something else with the 20.
Yeah.
You know, which
because
could
it's
be,
simulacral.
you know, yeah, which could be a bar of candy, or it could be an ironing
Yeah.
bar. You know, it could be anything. You know.
Or it could be somebody to fuck.
Any of
and
that,
in this,
right.
I'd still have to be handing over the sensate body.
That's exactly right. So it doesn't matter
No,
what's male
no.
or female, and
Yeah.
that's why that it does matter means that there's something else that's being said here,
Yeah.
and that's
It's a
what-
flaw.
What?
It's a flaw. I mean,
It's a flaw. Well, it's either a flaw or something else is being said here. The
Right,
question is,
okay.
what's the else? It could also be a flaw and something else being said here. But
Yeah.
There is one element is that all of desire is reduced to sexual desire, and I disagree with that. Desire is more open than that.
what is sexual desire?
But as Barney just said,
That's just part of it. Part of it is, you know, no, seriously. What would be this thing? What does it mean to talk about sexuality? We use the term all the time.
Mhm. No, that's a good point.
What is a sexual
Then
term?
When he distinguishes, he says it would give someone after distinguishing sexuality and eroticism, but then he goes into sort of the distinction between like animal instinctuality, something on that level, and then the distinction which you raise between like procreation and then anything that didn't go into procreation as perversion.
No, but
And
what I'm
between
saying is that whether it is eroticism or sexuality, which sometimes is sexuality, sometimes is procreation, so a very specific form of sexuality. It seems that all pleasures, when it gets to this exchanging of people rather than using the third abstract element of money, the only use would be sexual intercourse, nothing else. Or would it be? Because one has to remember that he has gone through the argument of the Sab quite extensively, showing how it is the property of the dignity of the person that one buys or sells, whether one sells oneself or is another person. So we need to remember it when reading this last bit, because otherwise it does sound just that one wants other bodies in order to have sex with them. While the old desire, even eroticism, could not look like sex and still play along the line of desire.
Yes, but it just seems also that by caricaturing them as this, you know, sort of female-male repositories, at least on one level, but I could have read this incorrectly when I was looking at it, but at least on one level, it strikes me that he's bringing in the thing called female economy and male economy. Female economy is, by definition, the way he's setting it up, already based on humiliation.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole problem, whereas male economy is always already based on dignity. And therefore, the transformation, or not transformation, the bartering, has to do with these very staid and essentialized, actually, notions of the psyche. And, you know, if he goes
Mhm.
back to, which he does, go back to questions of hysteria, you know, and Freud in particular, when Freud is speaking about the hysterical woman and so on, or the hysteric, he normally means woman, because the whole notion of the hysteria is of course the location of the uterus going, you know, nuts or something like this. So by definition, men can't be hysterical because they don't have uterus. You know, so it's just kind of like, well, let's get past this. If we can possibly take, what can we steal from Klossowski? Maybe he's not saying this, but it seems to me he is making these comments about how these economies of desire operate. And that's not uninteresting in the sense if you want to understand how, you know, economies of misogyny operate or economies of racism operate. They are real economies and they really operate. You know, so in a certain sense, yes, that makes sense. But I think he's trying to say both more and less than that.
Well, there is certainly the last chapter on the living currency.
Which means living body.
Living body is
yeah.
used as currency. To me, it sounded. I didn't see these, but it makes sense now that I'm saying. What I saw as a restricted view was that he went too close to the Marxist form of alienation as well, where.
Despite this critical take on Marxism
Yes.
prostitutes.
Because which makes sense, and it's something. You know, it's an important issue, but at the same time, after all this discussion of what is really the subject, what is the simulacrum and what is the real work, he goes back to say, well, no, we've got to defend the boundary of the physical body and its labor and the value of its labor. Almost seems to say that in the end, which so flies far less far than it seemed it would have.
Yeah, so could you say, without pushing too far off the plate, that the important, for this discussion, for this table right now, the important thing that he's suggesting is that the simulacra is alive. That's the first thing. And its livingness is always already erotic. And the eroticism is that thing that can be dealt with the same way as circulation of capital, because it has a use value, it has an exchange value, it has a profit level. It's just that the profit can't be calculated. It doesn't operate the same way that money capital operates. So it creates a different form of economy. And this is the economy he's trying to talk about, how that's living, the sensate.
Yes, but I would add that once we've gone through all that you have summed up now, the simulacrum is no longer a simulacrum.
And what is it then?
Well, we could call it a surface. It's the ease that stays together as it is.
Yeah, it's the surface, yes.
That's what I actually found.
Yes, that is interesting, yes. So the surface can have all these ridges and folds and crazinesses and whatnot, and still be a surface, because surface is being conceptualized as a simulacrum.
Yeah, but that's then your point when you go to the surface.
Well, there is a point in going to the surface.
No, it's a reduction of the surface conceptualized as a simulacrum, because the surface does not mean something else. It is by itself.
Yes, but usually when the conception of surface is understood, it's understood as either flat or having no depth, something like that. Or if it has a depth, then the depth is a layer, whatever. So if you understand a surface as a simulacra or as a hologram or something like that, you understand it as something that has dimensionality to it, is what I think he's sort of, I don't know, I'm not trying to foister this on you, I'm just trying to think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the picture of Grace is there.
This one over here.
Really comes into these
Yes.
problem, this question.
Can you say why or how?
Well, it's a curtain with folds and a pattern and light on it. And then there is another form of screen, which is the smoke, which is impalpable somehow. And the sensuality of that curtain is so intense that one does not really want to get behind the curtain. The curtain is the point.
Did you see it that way? Yeah, that's.
And I keep thinking of the amazing painting of Holbein, the ambassadors around the National Gallery,
Yeah.
where there is similar curtain with actually similar pattern, and it's the old background of the painting, but there's more color on the back, which one sees after many hours of observing. And the curtain is the subject of the painting, even more than the anamorphic scar in the front.
Is the surface.
Yes.
Yeah, as well. I thought you said the subject of the painting.
Yeah, it is a subject and the surface of the painting. That's it. The painting is about that curtain, that surface.
So
it's
after,
not about the beyond.
after
And this is desire. This surface is desire, which is in circulation as a simulacra. Is it desire or is it sensation? Because I don't know. I found this text really very hard.
It is
And
extremely convoluted. It's not.
And I wasn't sure
That's
whether
right, and there's
I wasn't sure whether the point that was being made was really very banal, which is that capitalism sort of deals in desire, or I was missing it totally, because I mean it seems to me that is fairly obvious that, you know, capitalism is about sex and desire and manufacturing it and trading it. I mean, more even than money. But I'm not sure that it's at all right if that desire is exchanged for a sensate body, because I think that desire is very, very carefully surgically removed from the sensate body so that it can be traded and distributed by capitalism.
what desire is removed from the sensate body. The
Yeah,
body is removed
yes.
from desire.
They're surgically removed, and the sensate body is left, so that desire can be exchanged and manipulated.
So if you're going to film that,
I'm going to put it into a neat little anecdote, which I was talking fairly recently to this gentleman, and he, in a previous life, he was the external director of L'Oréal, the pharmaceutical. So everything that wasn't in, he was French, he's French, but he was in charge of everything that wasn't France. And he said, oh, you know, we used to sell products. He says women, he said, they're, you know, endlessly obsessing about their butts. He said, but he said, I would never sell any product like that in a Muslim country. He said, because there women don't care about the size of their butts. He said, so I'd only ever tell them to buy wrinkle cream. He said, because they're obsessed by their wrinkles, because that's the only thing that's on show. And it seemed that it was this, although it wasn't, I mean, it was shocking in its kind of, in its sort of just a sort of blasé presentation, you know, because it was just so, there was the man, and this was the man that did that stuff, you know, and he wasn't disguising it, it wasn't kind of like, oh yeah, the secret, the underground kind of notion of cosmetics and stuff. It was simply, there was a man, and he had decided on that this was sort of like, that women's butts weren't worth focusing on in Muslim countries, because he couldn't get that kind of traction, because there wasn't that kind of economy. And that's your desire, but that's seems to me that the kind of sensate body is very, very far removed from this kind of notion. You know, this kind of that women and men are sort of sold, and these desires are exchanged, but they have very little to do with actual
reality,
actual sensations. You know, the physical sensations. You know, you're being sold the notion of sex, sexuality, touching, feeling, but you're not actually being sold touching, feeling. You know, otherwise, if you are, then it's some kind of like prostitution. You know, and I think that even that falls down, because the prostitute isn't a sensate body, by and large, you know. It's, he or she might be invited to pretend, but that's, you know, a simulacrum, you know, so.
Well, that's actually not a simulacrum, that's a pretense.
A pretense, okay,
Yeah, right. But I mean, yeah, I
so I couldn't quite
felt let down as well by
yeah.
this, so I can't quite defend it. So you two who won this book on here is going to have to defend it. But it seemed to me that this notion of desiring, let's say, sensate, to the degree to which sensate and desiring for this sentence are being connected, it still took as a given. First, it took as a given this sort of heterosexist normative scenario. It also took as a given those that could in fact be in an economy. Because it had no way, his argument had no way to deal with the political manifestations of change. So if there was a time when women didn't have property, and there of course was a time, and there still is a time, and something like that, and not only didn't have property, but didn't have access to money, didn't have access to anything, nothing would be geared to being sold to the woman, except, let's say, through a third party, being, let's say, the husband, the brother, the son, or whatever the story was. So there was no kind of relationship to this. It was just taken as a given. It was very, in that sense, it was very ahistorical, despite the fact that he was trying to locate the nuances of the historical regimes of power as regimes of desire. Except I thought he ended up hypostatizing them so that they ended up becoming these kind of driftwood scenarios. Now, the one thing I liked about what it was saying, the one thing I thought was absolutely useful and brilliant and put on the table for us, is the fact of the notion of the fact that something can exist not as a discourse, but as a simulacra which has the same properties as discourse. And to me, that was kind of an interesting, let's say, twist or sting in the tail to either the Heideggerian move between being and Dasein, or the Foucauldian move around regimes of power and so on. But because it was evacuated of its power, I didn't understand what else we could do with it other than reinvest in this notion of simulacra as something that has more presence, or to put it slightly differently, that presence, when understood as simulacra, could conceivably be used as some form of material that allowed for discussions around the political, the aesthetic, you know, whatever, the ethical. To me, that because it was kind of an interesting comment about the circulation of, it operated the same way as the circulation of money, but it fell down when there was a discussion of what you meant by this circulation of desire, because suddenly the discussion was between men and women, or prostitutes. This was like, you know, these were the three categories. It was like, you know, why are those the three sexual categories?
I found that, yes, I agree that the way it closes this point is reductive.
And annoying.
Yeah,
Sorry.
simplified. No, yeah, I understand. I didn't see that. No, I
Okay.
I agree with you.
It comes Jen.
Just one thing. To
Go
me,
for it.
the interesting bit is, before getting to the simulacra replacing or acting as a discourse, is that what we take as a simulacrum and something else should be at least turned around, or the simulacrum is misplaced, or better, what is not a simulacrum is misplaced, and that's the simulacrum, and the else is more real than the simulacrum. And I just say more real, not real.
Mm-hmm.
So the point I found interesting is this turning of things around, which somehow, reading it after Heidegger, echoes the revealing and concealing, but in a very different way, because it is one thing only. There isn't even a dialogue with the other element that sets up the relationship. It's only here. And that's what I found. I remember when I mentioned it a while ago, I said I found it scary because I saw conflating entirely distance between sign and meaning in one thing. And I thought, what if that doesn't happen? Then I would have to pay with myself. In that way, the example of the living currency in the end made sense. But if we collapse all the distances, all the dimensions, we go back to a logic black hole. There is nothing left. So it is important to realize that one thing is escaping and is staying in place, but not in reference to something else. That seems to me that I should probably be.
Yeah, I mean
that is a
yeah.
dream. Yeah.
It's
Go
a
on.
more original. Well, I just think I mean that's taking something good. I mean, you know, I mean whenever this was written, I don't know, it's just like,
1970.
no, not this text.
Yeah.
Klossowski's text.
Yeah.
1970.
70. Same year of.
1970.
1970.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah,
1770.
Yeah. That's getting confused
He's a
with
very
this-
old
with the
man.
facade, yeah. I think that, you know, in terms of a model, I think it's kind of a lot more interesting to revise kind of Marxist ideas of humans as commodities, in terms of humans as fluid, you know, this kind of fluid idea of currency. I think it's kind of, it has a certain sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, not premonition, but, you know, foresight when he's writing it. But I think that he's really struggling with the kind of whole sex thing. You know, I think you've kind of,
Considering it's about desire, and then there's this series of completions with these three usual models, which is just like, honestly. But having said that, I still think that the circulation of talking of desire as something that circulates, I think is actually not uninteresting. I think that is quite. Now, what you were going to jump in on?
Oh, well, I suppose I thought like with the term like sort of industrial slave, and it's not just sort of gendered. I mean, obviously it's gendered. Yes, but I suppose sort of like relating that today. Also, when it's, yes, body presence. But I don't know. I mean, I just I really have I've had. Like, yeah, I think the first time I read this, I thought I understood it more, and then the more I read it, the more I realised, like, but I think, I don't know, I think sort of, well, it's sort of like, when, did anybody, I sent that link to the list a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, where it was like John Cousins, Mark Fisher, and another guy discussing, and they, one of them showed a video of, I think it was like Fox, something's factory where the workers are really oppressed, and I don't know. So there's just this.
The workers are oppressed.
Really.
Impressed.
Yeah. Oh no, oppressed.
Oppressed, right.
And
Right.
it's like they're
Foxconn is the
producing
manufacturer,
computers.
Chinese manufacturer.
Oh, is it?
So, I don't know. It's all just like this. It all just seems really. This seems a really critical thing to understand what is going on in this economy, like what sort of financial economy thing, and how this all relates to sort of. That instant, because he's sort of saying, so bodily presence is already, so bodily presence, so instinctual level, bodily presence is already a commodity independent of and over and above the commodity itself. So these sort of two things, in the commodity itself that such presence contributes to producing. I don't so understand these sort of like energies going on.
No, to the degree to which Klossowski is talking about a digital age, and he's talking about in the digital age, or what do you want to call it, networked environments, that which has pretty much no use value, like Apple, for example. I'll scare and point at
Mr. Apple here.
That's right. No, but you know that. Really, on some level, you could make the argument that it's all in the packaging. It's all in the design. You know, the design wins out on everything. Then he's trying to talk about, well, how does that become the predominant economy? How does it become it's very different than an industrial economy.
Yeah, and how
But
do we
what's-
fight? He's given us an answer, perhaps in that last sentence, about how we fight this, because he sort of says, well, I'm not sure whether I understood this right, but. And how industrial states must either establish a strict relationship between their bodily presence and the money it brings in, or replace the function of money and be money themselves, simultaneously the equivalent of wealth itself. So I don't know what that means, but I suppose I was thinking like with different, like this Max Kaiser sort of listen to, sort of satirical kind of. I think he calls himself a satirical journalist on the economic kind of situation, but so he said the does commentary on like the occupation movement, or what's it?
Occupy Wall Street.
But all that kind of sort of like sphere. But interestingly, sort of, he's a sort of boycott cocoa. He sort of talks about strategies to sort of fight the economic sort of zones in ways which are not sort of the usual sort of ways. And I suppose I sort of see a parallel perhaps in what's being talked about here.
And how do you see, what is the struggle, what is the way in which
Well,
he's
I suppose
suggesting the fight?
perhaps I was sort of thinking like in terms of what I said earlier about the art, it's how you break the value system so that.
And how do you break the value system? No, I'm asking you not to defend this, but really honestly asking, because, you know, as we all know, waking up today, the banks got, you know, £1 million bonuses, you know, HSBC, HBSC or whatever, you know, ended up breaking down the LIBOR rates in order to actually, you know, pillage the economy. The entire, as you know, it's almost like the curtain has been pulled in like so, and then, you know, you have a whole different return to sort of the usual forms of, you know, very poor environments at the expense of very few. So it's turning into the very old version of Marxism again.
I think there's a bit of a danger here.
Good, because I'm ready to blow up the banks at this point.
Okay, well.
So I would really like to know how to fight this.
Okay, well, the LIBOR thing is
LIBOR.
Yeah, the LIBOR. So if anybody doesn't know it, it's most of the banks in the world have been fined substantial amounts of money, ranging from several hundred to $1 billion just in fines.
Yeah, that obviously hasn't meant
for
anything.
It's just pocket change.
It's just pocket change. It really is. It's
because
like, oh, well,
they were
fly.
they were manipulating rate, which is effectively an interest rate. But it's very easy to get outraged by this, and one sees the results, which is these huge fines, and one assumes that that fine represents some kind of financial compensation for people that have lost money. And
Who thinks that?
well, that's why you're angry.
No, I'm not angry about that.
But when you have to look and see what these bankers have done, and they haven't ripped off any money from anybody. They have like Barclays, for instance, who were the first two. First of all, the amount that they manipulated this rate, I think Barclays were fined £350 million. The amount they manipulated this rate was something, one basis point, which is a 100th of 1%. Now, first of all, very few people, if any, have their mortgages attached to this rate. I've never come across a mortgage product which is attached to this rate. So I think I've had this conversation with you. Second of all, the amount that they manipulated this rate is so minuscule that it would have tiny like pence bearing on a mortgage interest rate that was actually set on this product. And third of all, the way they manipulated this was downwards, so that if you found somebody who had their mortgage which was attached to this rate and it was moving a tiny bit, but it was getting cheaper. So what you have here in terms of kind of the famous widows and orphans, which everybody likes to beat their chest about, you really have no impact whatsoever on anybody that you're ever going to meet, like any individual that's walking around. The people who were affected by this were their counterparts at other banks who were also trying to play this same game. So what you have is effectively a kind of a small coterie of professionals who were behaving slightly improperly, probably weren't aware that what they were doing was particularly illegal, but really they weren't taking money out of anybody's pockets. They were just gaming at each other's expense. Now the fact that they've been fined extraordinarily huge amounts of money is really nothing other than a government and a jurisdictional. It's a jurisdictional opportunity where, because of the kind of public antipathy towards bankers. By the way, a century or half a century ago, that was Jews. You know, because they were rich. You know, just because these people don't conform to a particular kind of ethnic group. It means that people can get away with it.
Just because they may have been Jewish doesn't mean they were correct. There are some times, or wrong or right, there are some times when actions happen that people have to step up to the plate and say, yeah, that was not a good thing. Now, while it may be the case that the 0.00001% or whatever it is of the LIBOR rate that would affect absolutely nobody on an individual level, obviously it has some impact if they are making the level of profits they're managing to make. Now maybe they're not, maybe that has nothing to do with the LIBOR rate, maybe that's just a red herring thing, although I don't think so, because I too involved in some level.
You started off by saying about their bonuses, and then you talked about fining for corrupting the system, and so these are two different things.
Well, yes,
anyway,
yes, they are.
And
yes.
so if
But
they
Johnny
get,
mentioned the libel thing.
I did, because
But
just
only
because
a
they
little.
were fined 1.3 billion, but in fact they
but
made.
they were still getting bonuses and stuff like that anyway.
And still are.
And still,
Still are, yeah.
anyway, so it doesn't make.
Obviously, this has become very lively.
The point is a kind of no. You're making a very good one.
There is
No, hang on
like
a second.
like it's the crux of this whole century, because obviously like there's the lead into the World War II was also money banking things, 1939, and onwards. Well, this is like putting Max my learning. I need to read more economics, but he was talking about Max was talking about the deregulation of the banks, which allowed them to do their sort of their naked trading and gambling, which was basically they were able to risk doing because of the risk of the interest rate or whatever, or something what they were getting was kind of much less than what sort of we were all paying on our mortgages or whatever. So they were exploiting the fact that they could get this sort of very cheap sort of thing to go off and do their gambling. When it was positive for them, yeah, they made loads. When it was negative for them, they also didn't lose out because the bank, like the retail banks, were taking the hit, so we were taking the hit. So they were basically stealing from us. This is like since Margaret Thatcher deregulated.
Yeah, I mean, what you're referring to.
I know whether this story is right.
The
But
government
this is what
insures.
is right.
The government insures all bank deposits up to a certain level, which means that the banks.
45,000.
Which means that that the individual won't lose money up to a certain point, but it also means that the banks have got they're not subject to kind of people saying, "Ooh, what you're doing appears to be scary," you know, because people can relax in the knowledge that the government stands behind them. I just want to reply to Guy there. What the media are doing, and I think it's because it's on behalf of the government, is like a bait and switch technique. It's precisely that. They're getting everybody angry about bankers' bonuses, and they're saying, and this is why, you know, this is outrageous. But the two aren't connected in any particular way. You know, the bankers own big bonuses. Then I'm not trying to act as an apologist for bankers. But what I am
was about 10 years in coming, and not just sort of ripping money out.
trying to say is that
I don't need an apology. I just mean that
we're being manipulated by the media, and we're being manipulated by the government.
And also being
And
manipulated by the idea
bankers.
that somebody has the right to have £1 million bonus in the first place. Why is that?
I don't know about a right, but
well, it is a right, because otherwise they wouldn't be given out and all this kind of thing. That it's an acceptable, acceptable thing. When they're absolutely, you know, are they any more valuable than, you know, it's the old like nurses or whatever kind of.
Yeah,
and this is what the Klossowski argument is about. Okay, so I'm glad that we've now woken up and found the political gem in this piece, because what he's saying is that there is no real reason why bankers, as opposed to nurses, should get this kind of money, because what are they doing? They're playing some sort of game, but the game they're playing allows them to be at a certain leg up and have other things that go with the game, like yachts and things like this. You know, whereas the nurses can't play the game, or if they do, they're not going to play it very well unless you're in Trading Places or something in that wonderful film that I've watched many times, and obviously nobody else watches it. So anyway, the point is that have you not seen it with Eddie Murphy?
Of course, yeah, loads of times.
Love this film. So anyway, he does me. The thing is that the nobody at the moment is talking about nationalizing the banks. I find this fascinating because on one level I think it is a bait and switch type of situation, because of course the Tories will be saying terrible, 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 that's why we have to do X, which has to do with more deregulation, as opposed to saying, okay, we're just for the next, say, 15 years, while this is going on and everything's all crazy and the stock market almost fell like 15 different times. Either let everybody die and, and just have enormous bread lines everywhere, okay, that's one solution, A, or B, nationalize the banks.
But they did that already in this country anyway.
No, they didn't.
Not in the...
They didn't do that.
They
nationalisation.
No, I'm talking about
nationalisation is that the government goes in and says the bank is public. And if they don't accept it, there is the police.
No, and not only is the bank public.
That's what they did with the Royal Bank of Scotland.
Yeah, but no, they didn't actually. But because the thing is that any profits that are made are not going back to the people. People are not getting these bonuses. Like, I'm all for getting bonuses. I don't have a problem with money. I have a problem with the fact I don't have enough money. That's my problem with money. Okay, however, the fact that you could exchange these levels of bonuses, much of which are like the size of, can you imagine if if the NHS had the profit that HSBC got, just 1 year's profit, they had it to go circulate back into the NHS, that'd be fantastic. Okay, why don't we just call a moratorium? Here's a radical, that's what I want to know. What's the radical solution of Klossowski? It's to once again reinterpret the world back to old forms of, political
I think he's saying
philosophy.
you have to break the value. You have to break the value. Like,
and how do you break the value?
He melted down the jewels in that piece. My friend told me about. I think it was the Russian jewels or something, and I'm not sure mathematic, but when it's like these Russian jewels are extremely exorbitantly valuable, obviously in lots of people's eyes, there's historic value, and he melted them to make a new artwork. So that's a real kind of what's going on.
But, let me put it like this. Right now, the time period has shifted so that there is a difference in class relationships. The middle class is squeezed. Not to sound like Obama here, but the middle class is shrinking, the working classes are getting bigger, and the upper classes are also getting slightly bigger. Maybe not. Maybe just there's more money concentrated in a smaller group, but there's a bigger difference. And I find that fascinating because, what are the policies that have created this environment so that desire gets the circulation of capital in such a way that it removes itself so that it can only be a game amongst a certain set of players? So what happens when that?
I just think it's an incorrect analysis. The reason why I completely agree that what is occurring, what you say is occurring. I think the upper classes, the rich classes, are getting richer rather than bigger.
Yeah.
But since 2007, there has been an attempt by governments all over the world to reflate their economies. That means that what they want is everybody to get richer. Now, that's a kind of like two relative things. What's happened is that poor people, they haven't got really very much richer, but what they have got is that they're not standing on bread lines and soup lines, which was one of the alternatives.
I think is the
unfortunately
argument.
They correlate to that because they have got substantially richer than they would have done if they'd have been standing in the bread lines. Unfortunately, the correlate is that Lillian Bettencourt, who's the owner of L'Oréal, has got 7.5 billion richer in the last year because she had more money to in the first place. It's just, as they say, the rising tide brings all the rats up.
So the poor has definitely not gotten richer.
The poor's got richer than if they hadn't bothered to reflate the economies, the governments hadn't taken that decision.
Then there would have been a depression, a worldwide depression. Yes, that would have been.
Lillian Bettencourt would not have been richer; she would have been poorer. But then the people who didn't have money in the first place would have been really poor.
So you're saying that you're taking something that there is a certain amount of, and you're saying if we hadn't have made more invisible money, then we would all be starving now. Where did the money go then?
The money is being
because it wasn't.
Where did the money go in the first place?
Yeah.
It didn't exist.
Why is it a problem if it doesn't exist? Then why did we have to keep the status quo? That's what I don't understand. Why we had to give it to the banks in the first place? Why didn't we just give it to universities?
They invested money they didn't have, and wait.
Yeah, and then we had to
and then they lost money that they did have.
Yeah.
Yes.
Basically.
Yeah.
No, I understand that bit, obviously.
But what's interesting is that that it just seems maybe the argument that certainly because my economic obviously side of the argument is if not that might even be wrong, but there's something wrong in the drinking water here. There's something in the drinking water that strikes me as not right yet.
Let's put it this way, because I'm going to answer both these very simply. If I pop down over the road over to Ladbrokes and I decide that tonight's football game between Man United and Real Madrid is going to be a 3-0 victory to Man United, and I decide that I'm going to go and bet £1 million on that, and say, for instance, it's no longer taxed, but it used to be taxed, but say the government taxes me 10% of that because that's what they used to do. Now, it's in the government's interest that I can go bet £1 million. It's in Ladbrokes' interest because presumably they hope to make some money out of it. And I'm happy to do it because I think I'm going to win. Now, if I don't win, then that's my fucking problem. You know, I've got to come up with £1 million.
But it wasn't the bankers, when they didn't win, it wasn't their fucking problem, was it?
Made
It was
up.
the society's problem.
No, they made up. Yes, I know, because there was two choices, as Johnny rightly says. There was let everybody bloody stop, let the banks fail, and the bankers get poorer, and people go on break.
That's what I don't understand, is that Iceland's
or don't.
okay.
Is what, sorry?
That Iceland's okay. That's the bit that I don't understand by your
Iceland's
argument.
okay.
Yeah, so they went bump and everything,
Yeah.
right, and then they sent
No,
us
this
jumping.
is
I think
also like
it
about
wasn't
Ireland
okay
as
for a
well.
while, though.
I have
Can I
yes.
I think it wasn't okay
try
for
to
quite a while.
Yeah, but
introduce?
they're okay now,
No.
and there's nothing really bad.
Can I try
You
to
know,
introduce another element in this about the
As long as we can bring it back to here, yeah.
bring
Okay.
it to I can't find the page now, but quoting Sartre and Nietzsche, Klossowski,
Both very good gamblers.
exactly, says that the quotes say this as if you cannot give it away for free, you better sell it. And obviously, if you give something away for free, if there is no price of any sort, any expense, you do not have an economy. If there isn't an exchangeability of any sort. And it seems that this is the kernel of the problem. Also, the example you just made of the melting of the jewels, where you take away the exchange value that was there.
But is that what Klossowski's saying? I mean, because it seems to me that his argument is offering something a little bit more juicy in that sense. Because if he's saying that the simulacra exist in this kind of projected sense, then the kind of political action of nationalizing the banks or doing Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street, or anything, they're not, quote, going to work. Because what it'll do is it'll throw it between the two arguments that we've already got on the table. Total poverty or extreme inequality, but the poor not dying in the streets, although that's for to be argued. Anyway, but let's say that that's the position. So the question is, how does one get it to such a point where these gross inequalities are not happening at the rate of knots as they're happening? And to me, he's offering a political strategy around this, around how to intervene. And that intervention has to do, in a certain sense, about, it's not just removing desire from the economy. It seems to me that it's a little bit more proactive than that.
Yes, well, there are two. When it brings up in parallel Fourier and Sartre, the utopian model of Fourier was that everything should be in common. All the needs and all the objects of need should be in common, and if we have desires that produce needs, amongst which there is sexuality, that should be in common as well. So that I think in the collective houses, it was serious house or even practice when they were set in place, that there would monogamy or and vice versa. I don't know if there is a word for the opposite of monogamy. polygamy, but also monoandry and men and women could have as many partners as they wanted, because what the body was also, if there was a work of desire and the body was the object of that desire, and then that was a need to be satisfied, that should be put in common as well. So there was no property over somebody's body. That was opening it up. So that was, but he says this didn't go far enough. The SAD went further in analyzing this problem of desire and economy, saying that everybody was saleable, and therefore there was this element of prostitution at the root of economy. And he proposes this solution, provocative and absurd, of taking away the representation value of the money and bringing it back onto our bodies and see what it feels. And that becomes, and he says that don't think of the industrial slave that seems to be to sell her body because actually in French is all female, the industrial slave example, it isn't he or she. Think that the movie star is there, obviously she's there with her body, and that's what sells, but that's not the point, because is the domination over is the control of that body, which is something else than
well, I mean, the radical movements today, such as they are things like going off grid.
Yes. So subtracting from exchange.
Yeah, and the off-grid movements, so
what's the off-grid movement?
where you're detached from anything that has to do with the network.
Right.
But you're piggybacking onto the network. So you're basically a bot on the network. You're a surveillance bot on the network as opposed to an actor on the network.
Okay.
And so basically you're not traceable.
Right. Okay.
But you're still linked. So you know what it is. So it's not like going back to the land and hiding in a cave.
Right.
Something
like
that.
What's the purpose of this?
To not be brought into there's a self-sufficiency side of this. So most people are, in some sense, like a hippie farmer was in the 60s
logically,
kind of thing.
Because it is subtracting oneself or subtracting us from a regime where there is a code of exchange. And that's what is the important, interesting, interesting part to me. And this is why somehow in here I heard that idea that there is a code of exchange, and that's precisely the problem. They say that to me it just brought it up as a problem. I didn't go as far as seeing what solution it would bring, but and it becomes even more of a problem if you take away its abstract mirroring element, which is the abstract currency, and you bring back the fact that we are exchangeable as persons. Then one sees how important, how strong it is.
But what I didn't understand about his argument, and it kind of gets back to what Barnaby was saying, though from a different angle, he doesn't seem to address the problem of credit system. And I find that fascinating because at least for a good 10 years, there was the hope that money, or there was a hope stroke belief that money was going to go obsolete.
Yes.
And that what was going to be in its place was credit.
But I think he wrote this in 1970. I don't know whether that date, we just discussed that, didn't we?
Yeah.
I mean,
that's true.
Don't forget, in France, up until today, the concept of an overdraft is an anathema to people.
Yeah.
In fact, it was the same gentleman that he describes. He said there are people.
Is this gentleman your father-in-law?
No, he's not. No, he's just a friend. But he said there are people. He said, when they get paid, their bank accounts only go to zero. They just pay off their overdraft. And I was like, yes, some of those people might be me.
But that's a form of.
But in France, that's
really
it's illegal to write a check unless you have
funds in it.
Yeah.
It's illegal everywhere to write a check unless you have the permission for overdraft.
Right. Okay. But the French banks tend not to give overdraft facilities, so people are very used to having kind of zero as the ultimate limit. So the French are very.
That's true in the U.S. as well, by the way.
Is it? Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, I only found that to be the case in this country. That you
Oh, really? Okay.
But anyway, but what the reason I'm mentioning
that
this.
explains why we're in such a fucking mess, doesn't it?
but what I find interesting was missing in this analysis. But you're right. I forgot that it was written. 40 years ago, but is that the use of the credit system, and this is again where I think the LIBOR argument falls a little shallow. I say this very respectfully, but because if and when the case was that the economic system was moving away from money and getting into credit, so one's relationship to, let's say, money or exchange value or circulation was always in relationship to where one stood on the band of the economy, not so much how much money one had, but the ability to be a trader or not. And if you were able to be this trader, whether or not, I thought you were going to say when you went down to Ladbroke and you had £1 million, you didn't actually have
well,
£1 million.
No, it didn't have £1 million.
Right.
That's the point. The point is
yes,
that Ladbroke's given me credit for £1 million, and I've bet it, and I've been happy to do that, but now I've lost it, or say I've lost 15% of it or whatever, then it's really my problem. The fact that I can't afford the million or can't afford 150,000 of it, they will now come after me, and it really is my problem. Now, the fact that it wasn't there in the first place, that it was just credit that somebody at Ladbrokes had decided, oh yeah, that'll do, he'll do. The government was happy because they taxed me. Ladbrokes felt, hey, you know, we're going to make some money out of this, but now they're coming after me, and it's my problem.
Which is called selling short.
Yeah, so now 150,000 has turned into a real money because I'm going to go to prison unless I have to pay it back.
But you see, that's the whole problem. So the whole relation between the selling long and selling short and the options market and all the rest of that kind of thing was going on. When one started fiddling with the LIBOR rates, this is where it started mattering, because it created matter. The matter it created was money matter.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
Yeah, sadly.
Yeah.
And so
money is always created, but this isn't here as well.
yes, but what he, anyway.
No,
you're right. You're right. You're right.
I agree with what you're saying, and the more we discuss it, the more I see not the limit of this, but various limits. After all, it's a very short text.
But we have to write the next one. We have to write one that's in 2010, wrong year, whatever year.
And actually, credit is the beginning of the bank system. There is even before.
Yeah, of any bank system.
Yeah, that's a bank. Otherwise, there is no. But I believe that in here, what is interesting is precisely the passage from the use to the exchange, which emerges here and there as an issue of representation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't say for a second that we should go back to economies of use only, because
you mean bartering economies?
but then all that we know will disappear, more or less.
Well, and it does tend to go back into this is what Gail Rubin's piece is about, trafficking women, because then suddenly you have this like exchange, the bartering has, at least in the past, been the females get bartered.
Yes, and what he seems to say here is that these problems somehow remains hidden inside industrial economy when he speaks about living currency. That he says, at the end of the day, the ultimate point, if you want to strip away everything, instead of gold, you have your own body to pay with.
But some bodies are worth more than others.
Yes, but that's what it doesn't. It gets lost. When it brings it up with the argument of Saddle, what one buys is the dignity or the control over the dignity of one person, and then it gets lost. And in the end, it goes back to the pure sex, gymnastic, as I said before, nothing else. So it's not, all the nuances and all the values are actually lost in the argument. Yeah.
So what are we left with here?
Well, it's also the other element that is quite elusive, because I don't believe it's developed, is the artistic position.
Mm-hmm.
Where it stands in reference to desire and in reference to representation.
Mm-hmm. Which he doesn't really.
No, it just it touches upon it here and there, and then.
I mean, we can try and give it a go. Let's say, for example, if what we've got here is the question of simulacra. Let's go again with that, and the relation between simulacra and fantasy, and full phantasm. Because I want to. Aren't we also going to be talking about the unconscious today, or no? This next week. let's just at least lay the groundwork for it so we can move into that. So we have something that becomes projected. This is the simulacra. And then we have on the other hand, or on some other scenario, this question of fantasy. So what is a fantasy? What does he mean by fantasy? Or what do you think Freud, I know we haven't studied it properly, but what does Freud mean by fantasy? Or what does Bataille mean by fantasy?
I don't know what Bataille means.
What does Ann Summers mean by fantasy?
Well, Klossowski means a sort of focused and projected desire.
And how is that different from the Molyneux?
Well, I don't think it is. I think they're fantasy pictures.
Yes, okay, good. So that's good. So we've got, so that can give you an example of how that could look, right? So
Yeah.
So, okay, there's a trap that I am sadly laying for you.
You know how I am with your traps, Johnny. You know, I just walk
Right
into
into
them,
them.
just action. That's it.
Wait a second, where is that
She was talking about
trap?
ground.
Where is that bloody trap when you need it? Okay, so we have fantasy, which is a projection. It's an erotic projection. And we have yet to figure out what we mean by the word erotic or sexual for that matter. But all right, let's leave that for the time being. And then on the other hand, simulacra seems to also mean this kind of projection of some kind. The triumphant who we're speaking. Right? So now, he is having some kind of relation between, he's manufacturing some kind of relation between this phantasm as an aesthetic move and the simulacra as the surface stroke ground, or groundless ground, that the phantasm can take hold or can be expressed, somehow can be in relationship to it. So then we can circle to, or not circle back to, but maybe make a lateral move to what Dane was saying with Lyotard's assassination of experience through painting, where he is making some kind of a similar remark, because the title itself, which is The Assassination of Experience through Painting, should give it away in this sense, because it's this relationship between how something gets projected as a, let's say, as an object of art, or as the object, as the product, and something that gets projected as the fantasy that imbues the product with life. And then a third element, that the projected simulacra is itself life. And how come that ends up creating A, a certain kind of an aesthetic, and B, one that refuses this question of experience, but allows for the question of history. So that's the other.
I think we're looking at the surface of the simulacra. I'm afraid I'm going to say it's a body without organs. Whereas the
Did you ever think you'd come back to do
oh God, you know, so,
You hate to lose.
yeah, no, that's the sound of snapping bear trap. The fantasy is content. The simulacra is a
Is form?
no, is a surface, an informatic surface without content.
Except it has content in the sense that it's
Well, it's
erotic.
in the sense that it's informatic. It has a message.
So why isn't that content?
Because it's not experience. It's an
So
experience.
That seems
of content.
tautological, so experience is content.
Yeah, I like that.
I don't think we can, if you start by setting content anywhere, the whole problem is
Okay.
because that's precisely, if there is
So it was a
something,
really good attempt.
if there is something that we can say from Klossowski, is precisely that the simulacrum is no longer the hollow concept that comes from Plato onward as a signifier without signifier.
It's no longer an empty vessel.
The thing is completely turned inside out, with an economy where what apparently is a designing subject and an object of need moves away from this endpoint. This is why I started by referring to Heidegger. Moves away from the two endpoints and concentrates on the desiring moment, and that, keeping this going, is the real aim, and everything else is a simulacrum. But maybe Klossowski borrows it from somebody else, but this is what I find interesting in his argument. Certainly it emerges in the Lyotard discourse theory, the book as well. So in these terms, art becomes a major element to be discussed again, and I don't know how these can be used to address the political and social problems we mentioned, because this is circulation. This work of desire is circulation, and if that stopped, we end.
Well, rather than talking about it in terms of political and economic, let's talk about it in terms of aesthetic. Let's just bring it back to something that we can attempt to play with. Like, is this a form of an aesthetic theory? Do we have an aesthetic theory?
Oh yes, absolutely. This is an aesthetic theory.
Okay.
This is what's simple about it.
We almost got there now. Right. Okay, and what is the aesthetic theory then? What are the components of the aesthetic theory that Klossowski is putting forward?
It's actually these are that I just described. That
Say it again.
There is it starts from an accepted organization when there is a desiring subject and a desire object, or a need and a satisfaction.
So why would that be the starting point for an aesthetic theory?
Well, this is not what he proposed, but this is where he would start. And then he criticizes that.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry.
And then he says that in this process of satisfying a need, is what is at play, the desire that wants that object, is actually the center, if I can use this word. And so this is why I said it's not helpful to speak of content, because what he's rejecting is precisely content. He's interested in keeping the desire desiring, or having fantasies.
But why is that an aesthetic theory then?
Well, because that's an aesthetic theory as in a theory to make art, in that sense. I said, well, that's precisely the way I approach, the way I am in the making of art. Rejecting all ideas that the artist, the intention, what the object means, all that. No, it's I take away all those values that can be then exchanged monetarily or semantically or whatever you want, and I just focus on the fact I like to be there playing with what I like to play with. That's, to me, is fundamental.
And the things that you like to play, not to make this all about you lay on the table, but the thing that you like to play with then is just with line to hand, or do you?
In my case, at times it's a very system of art that I address as my material.
Is the system of art?
At times it has been done, yes.
And what is the system of art?
Well, our expectation of what the art is supposed to be, and the object exhibited is supposed to be, or things of this sort. Reactions to what I find.
Is that true for everyone else? Do you find that in your own work? What do you find, Don?
But say this again, the system of art.
Well,
in your work, how do you begin your work? Something annoys you.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. Yes.
So is that how you begin your work? Something annoys you?
Yeah.
That's what sparks it up.
I mean, sometimes it's not usually happy inspiration at all.
Suffering.
I don't know. It's more I don't know, maybe. I always just say justice then. I don't know. I think it's from talking.
But
Talking to Bobby.
Yeah.
Bobby, such a good news.
Even for more traditional modes of making art, painting, one likes painting, being there with the brush, the canvas, and rubbing the thing on the canvas, or whatever material one is using. Then, yeah, you can look at it and say, yeah, I don't like it, still change this. But the pleasure, the satisfaction, that desire is in doing that. And that is not the object, the hard object at the end with the frame that goes on the wall. It is bought, sold, commented, criticized, praised. No, it's my time with it, which...
Okay, so now we are finally getting somewhere. Okay, Dane?
So that system art, is that's an economy, but it's not it's not the economy that, in the sense of the purchasing, the selling of art, that it's a different, it's a bit more economy.
And why is this important? Why is this not like, why is it sort of like, oh God, we just spent 2.5 hours batting our heads against this simulacra fantasy banking issues. Why? It seems like it's kind of self-evident.
I mean, it's moving away from the object and toward the towards dynamism as an aesthetic theory.
Okay, so or intensity, any of these kind of things. So
flow.
What's missing in this then? What's missing in aesthetic theory is social agency, is subjectivity, is objectivity, is what else could be possibly missing? Audience. I mean, I often hear a lot of people that are talking about art is they ask questions: where's the audience? Who's the audience? I mean, it has nothing to do with an audience. Goes this argument?
Glenn Gould.
What?
Glenn Gould, the pianist.
Mm-hmm.
So the correct ratio of artist audience is 1 to 0.
Yes.
And don't get me wrong, obviously there is an interest in the return and everything that happens, but only as long as it plays a part in this dwelling in the making.
Right. Okay.
So
how is this different than Adorno's aesthetic theory, than his notion of constellation that we looked at 200 years ago now? This is somebody
too young to
that was in December. Yes. We also did we do aesthetic theory here? I thought we did. Oh.
He
Sorry.
mentions the university event here. This is the section where it gets more into the art. Like on the page.
What page is that?
Well,
19.
Oh, 21, page 21. He mentions universal event. But I suppose I was thinking before it gets into the last section.
I mean, it just seems to me that this has been a very hard text for you to break into. Because either it's that he's just said so much that's so dense, or what like Bonnie was saying, or what he's saying is really banal, and therefore it's just not reaching. But if we just try and reel it back in to get a sense of what could possibly be meant by the aesthetic move forward, then he's saying, he's trying to talk about something that we need to get on the table other than feeling like we're feeling the elephant and going, oh, well, it's got a trunk, it's got a foot. Yes?
Well, I think he's saying the aesthetic experience is like this voluptuous pleasure remains just as non-simulatable as subsistence, depending on whether the one is considered more urgent than the other. So deciding for the one against the other makes for an irreversible event. So I'm thinking like he's saying like voluptuous pleasure can break, can sort of disrupt the table of values, the normal values, just like aesthetics practice can.
And what does that mean?
So, well, I think, I don't know, but there's one bit where I thought he mentioned sublime in here. He's like, he's
Line.
Sublime.
Oh, sublime.
Which I think is, and he's rejecting the sublime as artistic practice.
And with it, uncanny.
So.
All these things that are very much in the domain of art schools.
is that
No, I'm just saying he cites just getting rid of it.
There is that you cannot simulate that you are simulating.
You cannot simulate.
That you are simulating. Which I'm rephrasing the things. You cannot doubt that you're doubting.
Oh, I see, right.
But what he's saying here.
But you can simulate that you're simulating.
What I'm meaning is that even there might be in the work of desire that seems to be producing objects, and we now understand that the objects are not really the end of that intention. Nevertheless, that work is not simply wasting; is efficient in another direction, which is producing its own work. In this sense, it is irreversible because there is no exchange in what it's doing. What it wants to do is to be doing. And this can be seen as difference moving into an order and constantly rearranging, or the artistic drive to make things and come up with ways to understand the reality of this.
So, would you then go as far as to say that he's offering a methodology of difference?
Yes. Now after reading it a few times, I think that Lyotard offer is clearer indeed in what we write on this first figure. But they aim at the same point, especially because they both, although it's not as clear in this text, they both say that it's irreversible. And that's why, that's the tool that goes against the economy, the irreversibility of value.
And why is it irreversible? Why does it go in one direction?
Because it's what Heidegger called a singular tantum or an Levinson tantum. It is something that
it's an expenditure.
It's just an expenditure. I was going to say it's just a happening. It's something that.
So it can't reverse happen.
No, it can't reverse happen.
You set with that, people? The notion of temporality that's been brought in, notion of duration having one direction. Be alert to what is being said here. I'm not convinced. I feel like, I could be wrong about this, but this is just me listening to everybody. I'm worried that we've skated on the surface. That is what happens when you start a new text. You're just sort of skating around and trying to take a little taste here, take a little bit here, and so on and so forth. I think you did an excellent presentation. You did a good supporting role. Are you going to present?
No, I found it really difficult to try and get.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. Was anybody else going? Because I thought that there were like 4 of you that were presenting. No?
No, the most were to go a bit more.
Okay. Yeah, but maybe we could summarize this little bit of the moment of the PhD seminar around this question of difference, the methodologies of difference. And the question is, how does this appropriate, or in any way appropriate, how does this approach your work? How does it help you? I mean, it's all very interesting to have, to have like a knitting circle. Not that this is a knitting circle. And Henry has banned knitting apparently.
I thought this was like a double knife in the head.
It is.
Something else. After Heidegger.
That's right. Double knife in the head. That's great. You see, if one is going to make the claim, which is being made on some level in the PhD seminar, that dialectical methodologies are problematic for aesthetic theory, and maybe problematic period, but anyway, are certainly problematic that way, then what do you have? Either you have just a whole series of opinions and ideas and questions on pragmatics, and or a sort of John Deweyan, Dewey, D-E-W-E-Y, Dewey's work on pragmatism, and this kind of move, so that your PhDs become just a kind of to me it would become, they become extended MPhils. It'd just be this longer discussion on why you like or don't like something. and then you can back it up with whoever you want to back it up with, A. B, you realize that the kind of work that you're working in requires dialectical thinking, requires a dialectical vehicle of some kind. C, it has to do with this kind of constellation that moves from Adorno's section. Maybe we should look at Adorno's. I thought that we'd done this. It wasn't fine. Adorno's section on constellation and situation in his aesthetic theory, which is parallel to this. And try and get a handle on how the sexual, the erotic, the desires, how they operate. Do they operate? I mean, I just gave a big talk yesterday in London on the relationship of sexuality to art, making a claim, though maybe it's not true, but making a claim that you can't have good art without sex, without sexuality in there somehow. It has to be in there. And the question that came up, or one of the questions that came up, was really, what is sexual? I thought it was a kind of interesting question, because to me it's like both self-evident and not self-evident. So that's why I raised it in the seminar as well today. And what we'll do next week, right? I think what we're doing next week is going to be the unconscious, right? How are we doing that? Or my computers and the same thing.
Could it be that asking what is sexual, precisely from what we've read here about this diversion of the object of desire and the simulacrum and keep changing places, that a definition which only sounds tautological is that is sexual everything you call sexual, or everything you experience as such?
Possibly, but